We'll welcome them into the program too. Thank you everybody for being here today. And we're especially grateful that Bob Gomel is with us and happy to have him here. For those of us who might remember his exhibit in the Margolis Gallery several years ago, we're really in for a treat. Happy Hanukkah to everybody as we begin our Hanukkah season, and hope that everybody is enjoying Hanukkah so far. We've got gifts from the congregation and the religious school and a whole bunch of Hanukkah celebration already going on. Tomorrow night at 6:30 will be our Hanukkah service, so hopefully everybody can join us for that as well. I want to go ahead and just introduce, before we introduce Bob, Miriam Friedman, who is our co-chair of the Adult Education Committee. Her nephew is with us as well, Philip Grossman, who is our Hanukkah house, who runs the Hanukkah house here in our community. And as we begin our conversation of photography and light and celebrating Hanukkah, we thought it'd be nice to showcase a little bit of Philip's home. And he's going to talk to us for a couple minutes about how he got into the Hanukkah spirit as we begin before we turn it over. So Miriam, briefly, why don't you introduce Philip? You're muted, Miriam.
All right, welcome everyone. I'm really excited to introduce Philip. He's the creator, designer, and construction artist of Hanukkah House in Houston that's located in Meyerland. Full disclosure, he is my nephew. Actually, he's my great nephew in both senses of the word on my husband Bobby's side. So I can't take any credit for his talent genes. He and his wife Dana and 3 children annually host Hanukkah House, which is not just in the Jewish community, Christian and Asian and other communities as well. Often when we drove pre-COVID, of course, there were people out of their cars punching the music button and asking questions. In that way, the Grossman Hanukkah House contributes to our interfaith relations as well. So Phil, welcome, and please enlighten us. Tell us your story.
Again, yes, thank you for having me. Happy Hanukkah. Yes, I am the Jewish Griswold. I'm the Hanukkah Harry. That's what people call me. I've been doing this for about 13 years. I grew up in Fondren, Southwest, and my dad used to do lights on his house. And, you know, something sparked interest in me, and I've been doing it ever since. Once I had our first child, I have 3 kids, one's at Beth Israel and 2 at Emory. But once we had our daughter, I started putting up lights. Started off from there, and it's gotten bigger every year. So yes, I do this for the community. I do it for the kids. I do it for everybody that can't who don't put out lights. You know, it's this misconception that, you know, just because we're Jewish or, you know, another religion, you can't really put up lights. And I'm here to prove everybody wrong. You could, you know, light up the house, put decorations up. I have a few pictures I could show you. Let's see, let me share my screen. There we go. Is it working? Is it sharing right now?
Looks great.
Okay. Let's see here. So this is a house I did a couple years ago. I did this. And then my wife asked me to put a music button out, and this is this year. So if you come by, there's a music button over here, and everything blinks to Hanukkah music. And you know, it takes me a lot of work to do this. It's about 3 weeks of putting up every light, and I'm pretty meticulous how everything goes up. I had to hand make all my decorations, all the dreidels I handmade and painted, even the dreidels and the gelt I had to make out of foil and foam and whatnot. So here's a little video of the house. Let's see if I'm not sure if you can hear the music, but that's what the house looks like. That's what the house looks like at night. It's pretty impressive. So yeah, you should definitely come by. Let me stop sharing the screen. There we go. Get back to my Zoom. Okay. Yeah, so come by. You can follow me on Instagram at Hanukkah House. It's HANUKKAH House. You know, I do this to inspire people. So hopefully I can get some other families in the neighborhood to put up lights and and enjoy it. So this is for everyone. So I appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to seeing other houses in the community putting stuff up. But
Thank you, Philip. Where would we go to find the house?
Yeah, so come to the 5100 block Carew. It's 1 street south of Beech Nut off of Rice, 5115 Carew. You can't miss it. Just look for the big blue shining lights. You can't miss it.
Then that's right off of Rice or Chimney Rock?
It's Rice and Beech Nut.
Rice
and Beech Nut on Carew Street, guys. Check it out. And we're so grateful that you're here. Thank you for joining us today. And thanks for being part of it. And Philip, thanks for all that you do for the community.
I appreciate it.
Great. Okay, so
You're muted.
We're very grateful, that Bob is with us as well. Bob Gomel is a member of the congregation and gifted photographer for Life magazine for many, many years. He's going to share with us his favorite photos. He's going to share with us more information about how we got started. And as we kick off the season of light, how photography fits into it and really what his passion for photography is. For those of you who haven't seen Bob's documentary, you can get it on.
I lost the sound.
You're muted again.
You unmuted. You can get it, was all we heard.
You can get it from Amazon, and I put the link in the chat box, and I'll put it up again so everyone can check it out and watch it. It's available for free on Amazon Prime. So with that, Bob, please join us and welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Yes, hello everybody. It's my great pleasure and thrill to do this. So I have a lot of pictures to show, and we have finite time, so let me begin, and we'll talk about the pictures. Well, that was good.
We could see it.
What do you see?
Right now, we just see the web browser, but we just saw the other presentation.
1 second, I got nothing here.
There it is.
You've got a full screen?
Yeah, just push play.
Yeah, okay.
Great.
Okay, here we go. Very good. I would like to start off by saying I'm probably the only photographer who has his own logo. Those 5 images up on top of a photographer or photographers taking pictures spell out my name. And whoops, this is what we call a snow fence on the beach. And the reason I'm showing it is because it was just after World War II, and I was able to buy my first camera, and I went out to the beach and took this picture, and fortunately I still have it. I lived in New York City, and the Brooklyn Bridge was an attraction. My parents allowed me to take over a closet and build a dark room, and so I was able to work this into my impression of that world famous bridge. And after college, I had 4 years service in the United States Navy. And at the conclusion, I spent a year in Mexico to get my eye back. This is an example of one such picture. I don't have to introduce this lady. Everybody knows who she is. Here's a more pensive moment of Marilyn that the image is not often seen. This is a picture I took in 1960, and it remains my favorite of all time. This little girl was waiting for her father to come off the US submarine, the Triton, the first atomic submarine that circumvented the globe underwater, and those tears were very real. Peggy Lee, and she's being accompanied in her dressing room now by Mr. and Mrs. Tony Bennett. Roger Maris, when he broke Babe Ruth's record. And there's me. That's the camera and lens I used to photograph that momentous occasion at Yankee Stadium. Adlai Stevenson and Joan Fontaine at Stevenson's 60th birthday party. He's actually playing the piano here. He was our UN ambassador at the time. And Arnie Palmer. Dr. Benjamin Spock, famous baby doctor. We all followed his dictates about how to raise children in the 60s. One of my very favorite pictures of President John Kennedy was never published, never edited, never printed. Nobody ever saw it until rather recently, going through my old negatives, I came across it. The reason it wasn't picked was this picture was taken no more than an hour after Kennedy made the historic speech at Rice University, telling America that we'd put a man on the moon. And of course, that was the big news. But this particular image, I find extremely attractive. Here's another favorite of Kennedy on tour. And here we are at Rice, the famous speech, and that fellow over to the picture right with the cameras, that's myself. Here we are getting an explanation about the rocket science, and you can see the vice president at the far left. And Kennedy came to Houston. There's Foley's, where the flags are flying on the right. And if you look carefully, you can see the president standing up in that open convertible as he rolled down Main Street. He was adored by the press. And I believe, facetiously, of course, that the word charisma was invented to explain what this man was. Here's a somber moment during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we toured our military facilities in preparation for a war. And you can see the concern on Kennedy's face. We traveled down to Key West Naval Base. But fortunately, Khrushchev backed off and we didn't ever get at that conflict. And here we are with Prime Minister Nehru and his daughter visiting the White House. When Kennedy was president-elect, he lived in a brownstone, and he used to bring Caroline to the street several times a day to take her for a walk. Here she is peering out the window at us. Famous poet laureate. You'll never guess what this is. This is what used to be called a tailgate party. The butler is serving the drinks, and notice how the gentlemen are dressed to go to a football game. Quite a difference. This is the first day of school in Silver Spring, Maryland, and this poor dog, he's been abandoned, and very sad at the idea that he's losing his master or mistress. kids ice hockey. There's a little story behind this picture. I made this picture rather than took it. I was with the league for a day or two, and I got lots of action pictures, but nothing that portrayed the excitement they were having at Little League ice hockey. So what I did was lined up two teams across the ice, put a $5 bill down. I got up on a little ladder and put a puck over the $5 bill and blew a whistle, and they came charging to get that reward. And of course, this pileup ensued, and it made the statement that I knew everybody was feeling. We're having a great time, Little League ice hockey.
Hey, Bob, before you go on, do you recall the name of the poet laureate that that you had that picture of a couple ones ago?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite.
The name of the poet laureate that you photographed?
Yeah, he slipped my mind at the moment, but he may come back.
Thank you.
I have no problem remembering who this is, but it is important because the dog on picture right is the famous Checkers. And just to recall why that dog is famous, when Eisenhower and Nixon were campaigning for president back in the 50s, he was accused of financial shenanigans, and he chose to go on television, which was a new medium, and explain his situation. His famous line was, "My wife, Pat, has a plain cloth coat," to suggest that he wasn't taking any money. But he did say that a gentleman from Texas sent them a Cocker Spaniel, and my daughter fell in love with him and named him Checkers, and we're not giving him back. It was such a success. Eisenhower kept him on the ticket, and of course, they won the election. Sadly, Kennedy was assassinated. I went down to the Capitol, and this was a picture I took of Jackie and her daughter at the casket. I was up on a balcony, and what I saw looking down was made magnificent by the fact that the clouds parted from the sun for an instant and sent down those beams of light. And no sooner did I take the picture when the clouds came back, and that was it. I call it divine intervention. It happened twice in my professional career. This was the first time. The procession leaving the Capitol. And at Arlington, 61 heads of state. Oh my gosh, what an assemblage. There's Charles de Gaulle and Haile Selassie, and people flew in from all over the world to honor his passing. There's another general, MacArthur. When he passed away, his casket was opened, and I was trying to decide for a general circulation magazine how I could photograph him and not be ghoulish. And I decided that since he had such a patrician nose, if I came in a side profile, it might be acceptable for a general circulation magazine. The only thing else I did here was wait until 2 o'clock in the morning when all the crowds had dissipated and just myself and the honor guards, and I actually physically moved the American flag to lend a proper background to this scene. Joe Namath. And this was taken at America's Cup. They did not allow any planes or helicopters because they were afraid of disturbance of the air. But I convinced them that the Goodyear blimp would not present a problem, and I convinced the Goodyear blimp people to fly up from Miami and give me that camera position. There was a comedy series called Car 54, Where Are You? And we were in the streets one day filming an episode. When it started to rain, we all ran for cover. I ended up in a candy store with the two principals, and the rain was not letting up. I noticed outside there was a garbage can with a broken umbrella, and I asked the two principals if they wouldn't mind going out in the middle of traffic and huddling under that broken umbrella, and they were happy to do it. And that turned out to be the opening picture of the story, even though it had nothing whatsoever to do with the script. This was a celebration in Aspen of college kids on spring break. And this is the Freedom March of 1964, where Martin Luther King made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. I had to climb almost 1,000 stairs to get to the top of the Washington Monument to shoot this picture out of the window. Subsequently, today, there is an elevator, but not so back in 1964. And Arnie Palmer again, an unusual shot. His ball ended up on a tree trunk. That became the cover of the PGA Rules of Golf. William Hayes. And this was an essay dear to my heart on gliders soaring. I affixed the camera to the tail section of the foreground plane, and I was in the second seat here, attempting to record that wide wingspan. And this Roger Maris, after he had hit his record-breaking home run, relaxing with his package of Marlboros, I believe, and a picture of his heroes on the wall, Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. Julie Andrews and oh my goodness, Carol Burnett, thank you. During a rehearsal of a show. This is General Shoup, Commandant of the Marine Corps. That passed for the old steam bath back at the Pentagon. And this was a story I did that had to do with strip mining. It was the ruination of the land just to get coal. And we produced a picture, a story that went on for pages, but this was the size, the enormity of the equipment they were using. Muhammad Ali in 1969, well after his fighting career was over, we went to see this Broadway musical about another great heavyweight championship from Galveston, Texas, of course. He enjoyed the show immensely and said to me that if it wasn't for the sex part, that story about Jack Johnson could very well have been me. And here is another Kennedy when he was running for office with his staff, with his wife by his side, enjoying a candid moment. Guess what's happening here? Well, it's the Beatles. And when they came to for the Ed Sullivan Show and had at the Deauville Hotel, the place was inundated by teenage fans, and we couldn't accomplish what we had hoped to do, was get them in a pool, but there was no way we were going to do it at a Deauville. But the comedian Myron Cohen, who was also going to appear on that show, gave me a lead as to people who owned a beautiful home on Miami Beach, and we called and they allowed us to come there. So indeed we did, and the lads and I enjoyed a day or two. Here we are actually on Miami Beach, and we went very little before we were discovered by some young ladies, and there's Paul. He trying to break away at this point, but all in fun. That blonde on the right, I'm going to tell you about her in a second. Here they are in the pool, cannonballing. They were very docile. They said to me, what do you want us to do? They were looking for direction, and my command was, enjoy yourselves, have fun. And they indeed did. This is my most famous picture, catching some rays after the swim. They were the whitest Caucasians I had ever seen after years in England and nightclub performances in Germany. My cover of Ali purports to be right after he beat Sonny Liston and became heavyweight champion. But in fact, the way the publishing business worked, we had to produce a cover well in advance, several days in advance. And so when I showed up at the Fifth Street Gym in Miami, days in advance, I asked him to give me some facial expressions that might indicate his feeling, if indeed he did, against an 8-to-1 odds, become the champ. And he sent this picture up to Chicago. It was plated and ready to roll. And of course, the inevitable happened on Saturday. So it was out on newsstands the next Monday morning. That same night of victory, we went to the Hampton House, which was in a part of Miami that was, because of the Jim Crow laws, was the only place that Black people could stay. And so there was this little impromptu party. On the left, you see Malcolm X with the camera taking Clay's picture. And of course, Clay, a great performer, pretending here, I think he must, pretending he was a matador. That's his brother on the right, drinking the glass of milk, and his photographer right to his left shoulder. A story I did for the public radio, public television station down in Miami. Personal family picture, that's my son, Corey, who's now 57. He's an attorney here in Houston, but he wasn't quite 3 years old. And we traveled as a family up to Lewiston, Maine for the second or rematch. And Corey climbed up on Allie's knee. And so we had this memento. Whitewater kayaking, the trick here was to mount a camera that was not only waterproof, but could get an unusual perspective on this particular sport. Fired remotely. Same effect was done here for the US bobsled team. I took the bobsled to a garage and we welded a camera platform on the cowl. And I'm actually in number 3 position as a 4-man sled. We made these practice runs. at the amazing speed of 103 miles an hour, bouncing over a rough surface. And what was even worse, we had to do it 3 times because I wanted an image that would not freeze the action completely, but show the motion and at the same time still have enough recognition that you could pick out the captain's face. Captain Bob said was that fellow. And so it took 3 different runs at 3 different shutter speeds. One of them worked beautifully, and that became the winning picture. In 1965, there was a horrendous blackout of the entire eastern seaboard from Ottawa to Florida. And I drove in and ended up somewhere in the Brooklyn Navy Yard and did a time exposure to get this picture of Lower Manhattan. But the story had to do more with the fact that the full moon was what illuminated the skyline, but that was over my shoulder. And so what I decided to do at this point was to rewind the entire roll of exposures, turn the camera 180 degrees, put on a telephoto, and expose the moon in the upper right-hand quadrant where I knew there would be nothing else. When I brought it back to the magazine the next morning, there was a huge discussion about the ethics of manipulating a picture in a news context. But after hours back and forth, and my argument, of course, was that if I were on the Jersey side, that indeed would have been what I saw, and that convinced them enough to go with it. And it was picked up and used all over the world. Parry matched Stern. It was a very popular image. So 6 months later, President Johnson is being inaugurated. Well, there's Hubert Humphrey. And of course, they had to do this now for the first time behind bulletproof glass. And I was thinking, what could I add to this that made it work? And off to my left, quite a bit out of frame, was the presidential seal. So I did the same thing I did with the blackout. I rewound a whole roll of film of these 2 principals applauding and re-exposed faintly the seal as if it were a reflection in the glass. Dustin Hoffman, right after he made his first movie, The Graduate, but he had no idea that it was going to be successful. And he was living in Manhattan at the time, and he thought, why not go and collect unemployment insurance? So here we are at the unemployment office, because he didn't think he'd ever get another job. And but the funny thing about this episode was that we traveled to the unemployment office in a studio limousine. I was assigned to do the US Olympic women's swim team in 1964, prior to their going to the Tokyo Olympics. And I decided that the best way to see these ladies perform was from under the water. And here, Kathy Ellis by name, who was all of 17, showing her butterfly stroke. She went on to win 3 gold medals in Tokyo. Robert Kennedy, about a month before his assassination, and his funeral at St. Patrick's. That's John Kennedy Jr. with that forlorn expression looking backwards, and next to him is Caroline and the rest of the Kennedy children. After that picture of Kennedy, I had a thought, if I ever got back to do another state funeral in that august rotunda, somehow I would figure out how to mount a camera in the dome, which is roughly 200 feet above the floor. And so when I heard Eisenhower pass, I called an old friend in the Secret Service that I had worked with when I was with Kennedy, and told him what I had in mind. And he told me not to tell anybody, but to get down here days in advance and help me set up a rather elaborate rig that went across the top of the dome. And what was unique about this was, in addition to the lights, which I had to add to illuminate 200 feet of wall, I had to have a remote control. We didn't have radios that did that at the time. So I had to string zip cord wire 500 feet, an entire roll down, winding back stairwell. And if you look at the 10 o'clock position, you see those wooden stands is where we were sequestered. And I actually took this picture with a foot switch. And fortunately, the lights and the camera worked. And when it was published, the rest of the world's press claimed it should be a pool picture, and Life said, no, no way. But what is interesting is that several years later, National Geographic came along and wanted to do something similar, not at a funeral, but they wanted that perspective. And they went before the Congress jurisdiction and picture as a precedent, and they got permission. These are some of the other covers I have done in my journalism career. That's Bobby Darin, Paul Anka in the yellow background, and he didn't know what to do. And so my wife said, well, pretend you're wiping your tush with a towel. And he got into the mood, and that was the picture. I did some charity work, the United Fund. And the famous Bullish on America campaign. This was an interesting challenge. On the left, it was just a chip that's dark brown. And in order to get that color, to give it some life, I shot a beam of light through a glass prism, and it broke the spectrum of the light into the component parts. I know we're interested in light. And to the right, of course, an annual report, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson. What was missing in much of industrial America was color. It was all fluorescently lit. And so I felt the need to add colored gels in many instances to give it some excitement. These are some examples. In the middle, in fact, they needed a picture of pouring oil. And I had to make something of it that would be visually exciting, and chose to light it in that fashion. I did a book on our Houston ballet, and I dressed everybody in a black turtleneck sweater. The lady on the right is an example of one of those pictures. I did work for the US Army. And this was Medtronics, the pacemaker people. My son Barry on the seat with his partner. He's a dentist, and we needed to suggest the ethnicity in the mix of subjects that they handle at their practice. And they were sitting on the sidelines while I had the kids on the bench, but the kids were not getting enough excitement by themselves. So I asked the two doctors to come in there and liven things up, and they squeezed the kids, and we got this wonderful animation. This is a geologist looking for oil at his map. And on the right is something called a diachromic chamber. It measures sound. On a trip to Israel on your left, and another portrait of a gentleman I knew. Everybody knows who that gentleman on the right is. I don't have to explain him, but on the left is my father, Maurice. Sam Carfer asked me after I sent him the pictures, and people want to know why it's so far to the left. Can you move me over to the middle a little more? And I said, Sam, it's perfect the way it is. You're looking toward the middle. I'm not going to move it. And he accepted that, which was great. My one and only food assignment, I had studied the painter Archibald. He was 17th century. He made portraits in vegetables and fish and such. So I got the idea for one of our downtown Houston restaurants to do something along that line. And the jumping marlin was for a real estate brochure trying to sell fishing in southern Texas coastline. And I knew from the Hemingway Old Man in the Sea movie that you just could wait out there forever to actually get the real thing. They failed and used 16mm movie tone film in their movie. But I went to Papa's Seafood and borrowed a stuffed marlin off the wall, painted the cinder block back of our studio a marine color, got the Houston Fire Department to come over with a pump truck for a small donation. And we hung the marlin by fishing line in an A-frame, and that was the picture. My dog Trigger, and on the right, a cockatoo, again for my son Barry's dental practice, that became their trademark. But the one in the middle I want to just tell you a little bit about. It was the American Brick and Concrete Association, and they said, what if the 10 Commandments had blown clear after these thousands of years? Would it be a testimonial to the longevity of our product? So I looked up what Cecil B. DeMille had used, which was Aramaic, and had a model maker in Houston. I'm sorry about that phone, but I. One more time. Okay. Call from 215-823-3145. Okay, so we had these units, and I went up to Monahans Desert in North Texas and planted them in the sand. But there was a problem in that my footprints were all around, and it destroyed the illusion. This is well before we had Photoshop, or we couldn't fix this problem. And as I was standing there on a perfectly clear day, along comes this whirlwind that spun around for 3-4 seconds and created those striations in the sand leading to the tablets. And that was the resulting picture. That is my second divine intervention. Photoshop came along and I was anxious to try crazy things. I took this picture of a pole vaulter and I made it appear as if you were viewing it through a plane window high up in the sky. And this butterfly swimmer, I had him breaking through. Here again is that food close-up. And our wonderful skyline when we had this magnificent fireworks display so many years ago. We're not doing it now anymore because all different venues are doing their own fireworks, but this was a glorious thing. And it was done the old-fashioned way on film, where you opened the shutter for a blast and then just put your hand over the lens. The shutter stays open until the next blast, and then you remove your hand and then cover it again until you have what you remember to be a sufficient amount of explosions to fill your sky. Nowadays, with the digital cameras, it's much easier. Technology has made that very easy. And this is just something I took down in the Argentinian mountains that I like very much. Myanmar, the old Burma, and what attracted me so much here was the horse and buggy in the foreground. I'm interested these days in reflections. This is an example of it. And an old master that I, kind of a mentor, said that for still life pictures, you didn't want human beings in them because they detract from the scene, but the presence of a human being. He was illustrating a remark about a kitchen picture, and he had a hot cup of coffee on the table to suggest human presence without them being in the frame. But what caught my eye here was a box of tissues on the stairwell, and I think that fulfilled the same requirement. Kind of a food delivery situation. And the Taj, I just thought I was part of the crowd, so I used the crowd and framed it in a doorwell to get this image. We're traveling on the Irrawaddy River, and we stopped at this tiny little town, and I went into the kindergarten class, and I couldn't get over the way these kids were dressed. They were so colorful. I thought it was just wonderful. That paint on their face is part of their religious practice.
We've also got several questions. I'd love to pause when you're ready, and love to ask some more questions.
I'm going to run through to the very end here.
Great.
Nuns in practice. Spiritual. The Pushkar Festival in India. An entertainer. My wife, Sandy, learning how to play with some kids at an orphanage. And this was a wedding we just stopped and saw on the side of the road. And she went out there and joined the party and was having a wonderful time. One of my favorites. Russian soldiers were not at all how I would have imagined. They were friendly and courteous. A funeral in China, the whole town comes out to celebrate, and these are the musicians that played at that funeral. Must be their grandchild. In Jakarta, learning to dance. Those are not human beings. That's a statue an artist created. No pictures, it says. Okay, we're just about next to the last slide. This is Muslim holiest time of year, and the women out to infinity in prayer, covering their feet by newspapers on the rough floor. And my final picture, I stumbled across this one day in India, and I thought, oh my gosh, the Star of David. Well, isn't that exciting? But I investigated, and it turns out actually to be a religious symbol that predates our Star of David, having to do with the Hindu religion, and that's the equality of the one triangle is the male and the other is the female and such like that. But it was very interesting to see this because a picture of a manhole cover on a cobblestone street with a pigeon on it was what inspired me to become a photographer in grade school way back in 1941 or whenever it was. And here I stumbled across something similar enough. And that's it.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Bob, thank you so much for sharing all of these pictures with us. We've got so many questions. You just alluded to, I think, one of the most popular questions. It was indeed fantastic. How were you inspired? You shared your story, but how did you get involved with Life magazine? How did you begin your career in journalism and with photojournalism?
Well, I knew I wanted to do picture stories and not be a newspaper man with one picture. So when I got back from the service, I proceeded to show my portfolio to Look magazine, to Life magazine, and travel down to Philadelphia for the Saturday Evening Post. And I got encouraging comments and keep in touch. But at that time, I had moved back in with my family. My younger brother was away at college, and they had a terrible automobile accident. And he was hospitalized, and my parents were running back and forth from New York City up to Poughkeepsie, and I started recording my family in crisis, which was natural for me because I always had a camera. And in fact, the doctors allowed me into the operating room when they removed one of my brother's lungs. I had ingratiated myself to the point where they felt they were comfortable with my presence. In any event, at just about the middle of that, I had my next appointment with Life magazine. So all I had done was this family in crisis situation. And I brought in the contact sheets, and they were excited to see them and gave me what I thought was a tremendous retainer for the first rights to view this thing when it was finished. And that's really how it all began. It ran as a story prior to the 4th of July holiday as an admonition. It was a driving accident. And that's how it actually all began. I started getting assignments from Life to cover the picketing at the United Nations and so forth. And I built up confidence, and that was the beginning.
Just fabulous. You were correct earlier in your anticipated question, because we have a question about your camera. So what was the primary camera that was used for the initial, the black and white photos? Was there a variation on the different kinds of cameras that you used? And also a question about the darkroom, whether you had a darkroom in the early days. How did you photograph, and how did you develop your photographs?
Yes, well, the very first camera that I owned was called a Ciroflex. It was the first US made camera after World War II. So I was able to buy that in 1946 with $83.70. I remember it very well because I had earned that money delivering groceries. And it was important to process my black and white pictures. So my parents turned over a closet for me, which is where my processing, my developing and printing took place. The cameras I used after the twin lens reflex, which was a poor man's Rolleiflex, that's here, was first a version of a Leica 35 millimeter, but that got to be a problem because it was very slow in rewinding film to get the film out of there. So I switched over to Nikon, which allowed me to rewind film much quicker. And I have remained a Nikon user ever since.
Thank you. That's fascinating. 2 questions left. First question is very much anticipated. I shared the question too, but you got to tell us the rest of the story about that blonde woman in the photo with the Beatles in the water.
A blonde woman in the water.
There was a picture with the couple of the Beatles in the water, and there was a blonde. You said there was a great story with the blonde.
Gosh, you've got me now. I don't really. Oh, of course, you meant the ocean. I'm thinking
the ocean, right?
Yes, okay, I got it. Yes, there's a great story. She went home that night and told her parents that she not only met the Beatles, but kissed Paul McCartney. Well, she was what, 16 years old, and the parents did not believe her. And that was the end of it. She maintained her entire life as to the veracity of that, but turned out the family moved from Florida to the upper West Coast. And at one point, NBC was over here in Houston doing a piece on me at my house. And I showed on the screen that picture of McCartney and this blonde teenager. And that story that NBC filmed here went national, and the family up there in Oregon saw it and were astounded, because this was corroboration. This proved that their daughter actually did know and meet a beetle. Unfortunately, that daughter had passed away several years before, so she never got the vindication that she deserved. It wasn't until after, when her parents discovered she was telling the truth. I, of course, sent pictures to them, which they proudly hung on this.
Thank you for sharing that. As Hanukkah begins tonight, I heard about pouring oil. I heard a lot about light. I heard a lot about how life brings you, in order to bring life, you have to have the light. Can you share with us the importance of light, obviously in your work, but maybe it's something that we don't know about how important it is to have light as you're, and the way you have light when you're doing photography?
Yes, it's a tool. It's a tool that we use. The ultimate purpose of light is to help make your pictures reveal the point of view that you had in the first place when you're telling the story. Sometimes it's a chance lighting situation, such as the picture of the manhole cover, but oftentimes you control it in such a way as to make a particular point, whatever that may be. I try and move light and change light or hide light depending on what it is that I'm trying to achieve in the first place. But it is an extremely important element in every picture, and one that deserves priority. I don't allow it to be, if I have any control at all, to be just the way it might appear naturally.
Fabulous, fabulous. Before we conclude and let you go, I thought it'd be nice for everyone to watch this 2-minute video from the film, the documentary. Can you just share with us what is the documentary about, how it became, how it was created, and how you were contacted to create it?
Yeah, I met this gentleman, David Scarborough, at we got to be friendly, and I would tell him stories of my career, and he thought, well, let's do a video. And I thought, well, okay, because up to this point, I wasn't going to produce a book because I felt that the coffee table book market was super saturated, and the idea of doing a video appealed to me. So it was his first crack at it. He shot it with iPhones, and but what that, and I encourage you to see the actual full-length. It's called Bob Gomel Eyewitness. It's available on Amazon Prime. Is because the stories behind these pictures, in depth, I tried to tell. So if you're curious about some of these situations that you saw, you'll hear the full stories on from that film.
Great. Let's watch just a brief trailer of the film.
I was hired as a photographer for Life magazine in 1959. It was the fulfillment of a dream I had since I was a kid. My first assignments were Khrushchev, football games, Lyndon Johnson, Adenauer, Ben Gurion, Henry Cabot Lodge, Carolyn Kennedy's birth,
Marilyn Monroe, Jerry Lewis, Roger Maris as he broke Babe Ruth's record. I'm alone and asked him to show me various facial expressions as to how he might feel if an upset victory was his. The result was on the newsstands all over the world a little more than 24 hours after the fight. 4 pale, skinny guys entered the pool. Ringo started a splash fight. John did a few cannonballs off the diving board. McCartney takes a plunge underwater. He comes up screaming, "It's cold!" My best known photograph is of the 4 lads in lounge chairs. Charisma, what better way to describe it? Charm, aura, personality, magnetism, drawing power, attractiveness, appeal, mystique, glamour, a type of leadership seen as extraordinary.
Wow. Bob, thank you so much for everything that you've done. Thank you for all of your gifts to us, and for all of, on behalf of all of us, thank you for everything. Shabbat and happy Hanukkah to everybody. Early Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for joining us for today.
My great pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.